Welcome, everyone, to this session of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. Today, we have one item in front of us, which is a discussion of the advisory work group recommendations on strategic planning for county grants. Before I turn it over to Ms. Clemens-Johnson, I just want to kind of give first a thanks to the working group for meeting, discussing, and looking at ways that we can address our grant system. As many of you know, this has been an issue that we've discussed at this committee for a number of years now. We know that transitions are hard. And given the number of nonprofits we have in our community, setting up a new office of grants management and shifting to a new way of doing community grants has been hard, honestly. And I want to just say thank you to Mr. Murphy for all of his work on this, because I think when you've probably started to undertake this work, understanding the challenges that were ahead and how long certain things were going to take and other obstacles that presented themselves. You have been very honest with this committee. And I know you've been, and your team have been trying to work through many of the issues. And we are going to discuss some of the community grants, our legacy grants, and our cost sharing. But I don't want that to cloud with the things we have to work on, the overall great work of our Office of Grants Management and our county government in working together with our community partners, with our departments to get money and funding and support out to our nonprofits, particularly when it is a targeted grant program. And I know we've had huge success with our Office of Grants our Office of, Food System Resilience. Yesterday, the county executive just talked about increasing the amount of money we have in our security grants, given world events, to make sure that our people are safe in our community when they go to our houses of worship and in other places. So I just want to say before we get into the details and talk about all the things we got to fix, I do want to just highlight the incredible work that is being done to make sure that needs are being met in our community. And so I know we still have some things that we need to address, and I appreciate the working group for rolling up their sleeves and providing these recommendations to that. So why don't we get started? Ms. Clemens-Johnson, you want to walk us through?
Will do, yes. And I will give more background than anything, and I will let the committee talk about their recommendations. I was glad to staff the committee, and the members were all involved. There were 6 meetings over the course of 7 months, I guess we'll say, 7 to 8 months. The council initially approved a resolution 20-780 establishing the advisory work group in April 2025. And this was pretty much the culmination of discussions, really deep discussions that the GO committee had during 2024. There was a lot of transition that was happening. There was the legacy grants that I think was a sticking point for the county council because they were approved after the fact by the executive using his own funds without the involvement of council, who had really intense discussions about the legacy grants, the community grants, and what that looked like moving forward. So there was a meeting in November of 2024 where there was discussion about the community grants, the new community grants, and the legacy grants, and there was renewals and extensions, bridge grants that were provided for the legacy partners so that we didn't just drop them off. And after a memo was sent to the county executive, he provided a response February 2025. And at that time, the GO committee met around a week later to discuss his recommendations that really did not address the concerns that the committee addressed at that time, which had been ongoing and the same for like the past year and a half. So I think that resulted in the culmination and creation of this advisory work group on a strategic plan for the grants, so that there was specific response from community individuals, organizations who are familiar, some are familiar with the grants process, have been involved in grant making, receive grants from the county, and could talk in detail about their recommendation, their experience, and their recommendations moving forward. So we did have an ambitious timeline for work groups, if you want to say, with them starting in April, and then I think our initial plan was to bring forward the final report in November, but they were able to complete their final report in the past month to provide the recommendations that are included in the packet. So I will just highlight the focus of the strategic work group, which is listed on the page 1, includes the 3 buckets that are here. A strategic plan for the community grants award process, a strategic plan for the community grants legacy awards, and a consistent criteria and process for the cost sharing capital improvement grants. So this works group was really charged with focusing on funding that is appropriated within the Community Grants NDA that is administered by the Office of Grants Management. So there is a number of grants that the Office of Grants Management puts out in coordination with the departments, meaning that they may choose to use their funding within a certain year to support different efforts. There's been, I can think of an example of the Lighthouse Initiative within DHHS, where they have switched to a grant making model instead of doing things just by contracts, if you want to say. So the Community Grants NDA is the largest portion of money that we're truly talking about when it comes to this work group, which for FY26, it was $13.3 million. The biggest programs that they talked about were the community grants, as mentioned, which is $6.2 million in the FY26 budget, and the legacy grants were $4.7 million in the FY26 budget. And then there is $1 million for the nonprofit technical assistance grants, $1 million for the nonprofit incubator grants. They're now called nonprofit resiliency centers, and then $389,000 for inflationary funds. So we have received the FY27 recommended budget from the CEE. It largely mirrors the FY26 funding with some slight changes, but basically the same. So we will talk about that at a later date in April. So with that, I will yield back to the chair.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to some of the work group participants to help us walk through your recommendations and your process. Ms. Howe, am I turning it over to you, or? All right.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And just first, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to serve on this work group. As Executive Director of Nonprofit Montgomery, one of the issues that I frequently hear from our members is concern about some of the challenges that we've seen over the past couple of years. As you so eloquently mentioned, with the transition to a new process, there's always hiccups and bumps. So, my participation in this group was also informed by Nonprofit Montgomery members through both formal and informal feedback processes. So, and I also want to thank Ms. Clemens Johnson for her really phenomenal support of this group, keeping us on task, on target, moving forward, and Director Murphy for being a resource for the group and for the work that he does every day. I'll just start with the first recommendation, and Kim and I can just kind of tag team. Sure. Okay. So the first recommendation that we made is that we think that in recognition of some
Ms. Howe, sorry to interrupt you, but could we just remind everyone who was on the work group? Do we have the full list? Ms. Clemens Johnson, I'm not sure I heard you. Yeah.
Yes.
Just so for members of the public, so they know who was on the full list. Yeah.
Yes. I will just recite them off the top of my head. So we have Bridget Howe from Nonprofit Montgomery, Kim Jones, Executive Director of the Montgomery County Black Collective, Hillary Tasumba, representing the Primary Care Coalition of Montgomery County. We have Gabriel Albanos from the Department of Recreation, but I will reference that his staff, Jason Fasteau, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, excuse me, Jason, was a really active member and provided some really good perception from the department's perspective. And then we also had Mark Hodge. He was the representative on behalf of Dr. Bridgers and his special assistant, Dory King Rosarian. So it was mainly Mark Hodge that was there. We also had Ron Halber from the Jewish Council of, I always say the name wrong, JCCRC. Excuse me. Yes, excuse me. And I believe that was it. Catholic Charities, Sarah, I think it's Sarah from Catholic Charities. Yes. Sarah Watkins, yes.
Great. Just sorry, I just wanted to make sure folks know when that we had a whole crew of folks, and I know coming to council mid-morning on a Thursday can be difficult. So we very much appreciate you here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, glad to be here. So the first recommendation that the group made was in recognition of the time and effort that it takes to review these grants and the fact that the process to date for kind of setting the priorities has been a little bit fragmented. And we knew that the charge for this committee working group was to look at how do we set those priorities for how community grant funding is spent. And we thought that the best solution to that would be to establish a community grants board that would be charged with identifying those priorities, potentially being part of a review process, and essentially being an advisory committee for the Office of Grants Management to bring in that community perspective. And I think that pretty much is a abstract, high-level cover of that recommendation. So Kim, I'll turn it over to you for the next one.
Thank you. And thank you, council members, for allowing us to work on this. And it was a great team to be able to work on this effort as an extension of creating a community grants board or advisory board of some kind. We talked about the creation of a liaison in the county executive's office, someone that might be at the level of someone that in community partnerships that is actually actively knowledgeable about what's going on with the nonprofit sector, someone who reaches out as consistent communications with the nonprofit sector, can kind of help the organizations navigate, especially those that are small, new, underserved. You know, we hear from them a lot during my years at Nonprofit Village and even these past 4 years at the Black Collective. Black and brown led nonprofits, kind of the same thing over and over. So someone at the county executive's level that has a little punch and can actually be out in the community. And that might be a longer term solution, but eventually getting to that kind of a position. Going back and forth?
I guess so.
Are you next? Okay.
So then our next recommendation was our deep dive into the community grants NDA. And we thought that it was vital that that be preserved as a fund. And the reason is we talked a lot about how, again, prioritizing what are the areas which this funding needs to go toward. And we thought that maintaining it as a general fund that is then given advice yearly, it allows for it to be more nimble and responsive to community needs. We're not locking future county into priorities that might serve us well today, but might not be relevant in the future. It also allows for autonomy in the grant program and provides that consistent, reliable pool. We did spend a lot of time within that talking about the structures of that, and I think we get to that in a future section in the report.
And one of the things that I'll add to what Bridget has said is that the importance is, as she said, the community needs. And the community means the whole community. It is the needs of the organizations that are filling the gaps and providing the services, as well as what the county has as priorities, and trying to balance those. So making sure that all of that is taken into account. So we're at the NDA. Cost sharing CIP, we talked about some restrictions around capital requests as well, and making sure that they are aligned with the community needs that we have. They're aligned with what is available in our budget. We all have budgets that we have to adhere to, and making sure that these are projects that will actually take place, so that awards aren't being given for projects that are likely too far out or not able to kind of, what was the term? I think we use shovel ready or something, so more immediate needs.
The next grant was, or the next grant, I'm sorry, the next recommendation was around the legacy grants. And, this was within the working group, a very hot topic of conversation. And I think a lot of views were brought to the table and considered. And the conversation was very thoughtful. We recognize, where they came from. We recognize how we got to the point, what the decisions that were made to approve the legacy grants, and the well-intentioned need that it started with. It really started pre-COVID, quite honestly. And then it was, let's recognize that we need to keep some consistency moving forward. We do think, though, that as we are looking at best practices and wise use of taxpayer dollars, that we really want to prioritize. We think as a community, the community should prioritize having grants that are reviewed on a regular basis, and making sure the programs are up to date, that they are the right answer, the right solution to the problems that we face. So our recommendation is that the legacy grant funding should be discontinued, and that funding rolled into the community grants NDA, where I guess it already is, but that it be for community grants. We do recognize that this would need a transition, and our recommendation was for, and this was a very active conversation, our recommendation was that that after this meeting, and knowing that some of these decisions could be potentially part of budget conversations for the FY27 budget, our recommendation for a transition plan was to notify grantees that the grants could be coming to an end, and give them a 6-month allocation in FY27. I believe the county executive included a 12-month allocation in his budget. And so that was our recommendation for legacy grants.
And then following on from transitioning, we wanted to really make sure that we talked about the equity issue, and ensuring that organizations have the opportunity to get an application in, be competitive, that large and small organizations aren't necessarily always competing against each other, because those are two very different realms in the nonprofit land, offering more technical assistance to the organizations that need it, which a lot of it is done through Director Murphy's office, but a lot more can be done through other mechanisms. And if there were a liaison on the county executive's team that doesn't take away from the important work that they do in administering these grants, then you might have more appropriate and culturally appropriate, linguistically appropriate breaking down of barriers for organizations. And prioritizing funding in whatever way we see fit in the community based on what the needs are. So the equity and the access became very important as well.
And then I'm just going to dive into some of the very specific recommendations about the process for community grants. And I'm going to essentially just read these bullets for the record. But once the legacy awards are terminated, if that decision is made, the working group recommends staggering the application award process so that there is an application process occurring every year. So essentially, each year there would be a competition for one-third of the total amount. Those would then become 3-year grants. So there'd always be a new competition each year, which allows for that flexibility and that nimbleness and responsiveness. It also creates more opportunity for nonprofits to apply. The terms of the grant would remain 3 years, as I said. The new 3-year grant program would begin in July 2027, with the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity, going out in November or December of 2026. Funding categories, we recommended that the Community Grants Board set the priorities for the Community Grants Program. We did suggest several options the board could consider, whether it is incomes or socioeconomic status, geographic areas, historically disenfranchised communities, etc. There are many ways this could be sliced and diced. And then finally, one suggestion that I believe the working group felt fairly strongly about was that each funding cycle should have a tiered category, so that we are not having small and emerging organizations competing against very well-resourced and highly professionalized organizations. That also would ensure there's capacity building. We'd also want to ensure there's capacity building for all organizations, as Kim mentioned. And we also felt strongly that as the grant parameters are determined, that there be a determination and a clear distinction between programmatic funding and general operating support so that we can ensure that organizations are resourced appropriately. And I think that's it for the recommendations. If you'll indulge me, I did want to just share a couple of the elements of the conversation that didn't necessarily make it into a bullet point of a recommendation. But one is that we recognize the capacity of the Office of Grants Management is very thin. And we believe they need more resources in order to effectively do this job. We also recognized, and again, I don't think this made it into a formal bullet point, but that we are relying a lot on the departments because of their content expertise and their knowledge to do the review of these grants. And that has contributed to some delays. It's also, it's other duties is assigned for the county staff. The county staff and departments who do have that responsibility for monitoring contracts and grants are often stretched very thin as well. So we do think there's a need for additional capacity in county departments as we continue to move forward with these kinds of funding programs.
Great, thank you. Before I turn to questions from our committee, Director Murphy, Director Albanaz, any thoughts or additional comments?
Thank you. Rafael Murphy, Director of the Office of Grants Management. My role was to serve as an information resource. I was started with county government 2 weeks before a series of nonprofit focus groups that were led by Nonprofit Montgomery. So I've been with this grants reform process right from the very beginning. So I've seen this go in way before the Office of Grants Management was through. So it's been helpful to provide my historical insights on this. Just a few things to add to this, in terms of the nonprofit liaison position, one thing I've emphasized is that grants, while it is loosely used as a term for all nonprofit funding, is really actually a small fraction, less than 10% of the money, the county's money that goes out to the nonprofit community. The vast majority of the nonprofit funding does not flow through my office, does not flow through the Community Grants NDA. It goes out as procurement contracts from department-based budgets or other NDAs. So I think that was one reason why the committee recommended that this be outside of my offices, because the vast majority of the nonprofit interactions with the county don't go through OGM. Another detail on that, kind of an area of concern that I still have with pushing outside the Community Grants NDA, and kind of having these separate priorities being set, is one of the 6 consensus recommendations that were reached by Montgomery County government, the nonprofit community, and the county council when we went through the grants reform process 5 or 6 years ago, was they recognized that there was a disconnect between programs that were funded through the Community Grants NDA and programs that were funded through the base budget that literally did the exact same thing. And so over a series of years, money moved from the Community Grants NDA to department-based budgets to kind of rationalize that. And the things that left over in the Community Grants NDA were largely things that the county didn't do. So I worry, as a concern going forward, and this could be worked through with the group and emphasized with the board if that was established, was to make sure we're not opening that can of worms. So that if the committee decides that food security is an issue, how is that duplicative or contradictory or going out of a very carefully developed strategy by the Office of Food System Resilience, or climate change is a priority? How is that not contradicting what Department of Environmental Protection is doing, who also has a large number of grant programs that are going through OGM? So that would be one concern, is make sure we're not doing that duplicative effort. I think we already have a pilot going of this type of structure, and I forget the exact name of it, the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, where you do have this commission that is developing a series of priorities. And I think that's a pretty good window into the difficulty of setting these priorities, of structuring a grant program, of even though that group has a very specific mandate, I think it's a good window of what departments or what OGM struggles with when you have to set priorities, when you have a very finite pool of money, you can't do everything you want with it. I think that is kind of a pilot of what the committee was looking at, of how a community grants board could work. So leave it at that.
Director Albanaz, you've been on both sides of this issue.
Yeah, thanks. So thank you for letting me crash this party. I appreciate it. And I do want to acknowledge the great work of Jason Fastow, who represented our department on this work group. Jason may be an average softball player, but he's a very good guy. And we're very fortunate to have him on our team. And he actually, fun fact, used to work for Councilmember Hans Riemer.
Yes.
So he has an interesting and awesome perspective. So I'll just say a few things. Two that are broader context and one obviously specific to the Department of Recreation. So 21 years ago, I was working for an organization called the Latin American Youth Center, and we had established an office in both Montgomery and Prince George's County. And it was actually a seed grant that we had received from the county council at the time, because it was a bifurcated process. The council had their own grant process at the time, and then the executive branch had a different process. And it was that grant that really helped our organization get started, and they have grown significantly since then. So I've seen this from a funding perspective, but then as a member of, as the Director of Recreation and then a member of this body, I do give a lot of credit to our former colleague, Councilmember Navarro, who started us in this direction to consolidate this effort. And I really want to give you a lot of credit as well, Chair Stewart, who've taken this very complex issue and moved it forward very significantly. So we have to remember, although it feels overwhelming and it's far from perfect, it is much better than it was. And there's still some work to do, obviously. So specific to the Department of Recreation, and it was noted by Ms. Howe, which I appreciate, we do have capacity issues as the executive branch agencies who are then responsible for administering the contracts that are established once the grants are awarded. And as you heard me speak to this earlier this morning, our department has over 588 contracts and over 24 grants that we have to administer, and we have 2 full-time career staff members assigned to that work. So we don't have the opportunity to check outcomes, to check to see if there are benchmarks that are being met. We are simply just trying to make sure people are getting paid on time and that within reason they are following the letter of the contract as has been established. But as you also saw earlier this morning, sometimes things slip through the cracks when you don't have the appropriate infrastructure. So I read the report, totally concur with the recommendations. Creating those recommendations and operationalizing them, thank you, is not going to be easy. So, but I think in a state of transition to the next executive and the next council, there will have to be a deep commitment from both bodies to carry this forward and resources that are actually invested in to make these things happen, because it is important for us to, in the next phase of this, start talking about outcomes and benchmarks that we can reasonably establish for all nonprofit organizations that sometimes feel like they're flying a little blind. And there are examples recently of where that's worked effectively, and one of them is the Office of Food System Resilience. The outcome measurements that that office is producing is tremendously helpful to the nonprofits who work with that office, and so that the funds are leveraged much more strategically than they were before the office was created. And the last thing I'll mention for now is, having been around for a long time, a position like this in the executive branch, it was organic, but it did sort of exist. It was Chuck Short, who was the liaison to the nonprofit sector. And to the infinite credit of our former county executive, he appointed Chuck with the specific purpose as a special assistant to lead that effort. And so it's been done before, and I think it can be done again.
Thank you so much, Director Albanaz. Thank you to everyone for these recommendations. And I want to underscore something that Director Albanaz just said, is that we're again now in this time of transition, right? And I think the recommendations are good ones to point us in a direction, and putting them in place may take longer than we would want, because we know we are going to have a new county executive. Who that person is, we don't know yet, and won't for a bit longer. But I think in terms of thinking about the structure of the county exec's office, whether there's a liaison for the nonprofits, and how we move that forward. I think this is a great report to have at this time, because I think it does set up whoever does come into the county exec's office to consider some of these recommendations. And I think, and I don't know, maybe Director Murphy, this might be a question for you. I appreciate the thoughts on having the community group, the work group. I will say, and Councilmember Katz and I always say, when I was a mayor, but actually in a much, much smaller scale, in the city, we had moved to this a number of years ago, where we had our grants committee, and they came before the council each year, worked with us, set the priorities, and then they reviewed the grants and then proposed them. And having it removed from the council making decisions on grants and having an entity provide recommendations and having that working relationship, I can see how that can work very well. My concern and I guess question is, I'm not sure, given where we are as a council right now, getting something like that up and running that could then inform the next round of community grants, given when that has to go out. So that, I think that's what I'm struggling with right now, and we don't have to solve that problem today, but I do think it is one we need to think about in terms of this fall, because it's October, November, correct, when the announcement for the next group of community grants will go out. And I will be frank, even if we had everyone on council ready to go, the idea that we would get through the council, set up this work group, recruit, get people in place in order to do that work, to give a recommendation, and then have the Office of Grants Management be able to send out that information. I don't see the runway being long enough for that right now. Given everything we have to do and given so much transition. So I think that's what I'm trying to figure out. How do we set up our Office of Grants Management and our community grants for success, given this input and next steps? So I don't know. Yeah, Ms. Clemens-Johnson, if you wanted to.
I don't want to jump ahead,
Yeah.
but I know Director Murphy might have different comments coming from the executive point of view. But one recommendation that the group did give is that the advisory work group perhaps continue on.
Okay.
That there could be, because it's not a resolution that has a sunset date. We set dates in terms of reporting, but we didn't set a sunset date for the work group. So that the work group could continue if there was concern about conflicts of interest in terms of someone sitting on the as part of the membership and wanting to apply for the community grant, that there could be clarification or modification by the council of the membership. And that would be easier for us to revise the resolution or update the resolution to come before council. And so it's just one option that was put forth if this group wanted to stay in that role and continue their work, perhaps with a modified scope and perhaps a change in membership if the council felt like that was needed. So just wanted to put forth that option, but I don't want to speak for Director Murphy.
Great.
I would say that the two huge delays that we see in the grants process are in designing the grant program, so before the NOFO is even published, and then reviewing applications. We've gotten the administrative steps down pretty good. You've mentioned the supplemental funding that's likely to come for we're rolling through that now fairly quickly, and we'll get that money out the door, I think, far faster than you would ever be able to do with a procurement contract, in great partnership with OEMHS on that. And so that really worries me, is my team and I can, if we are given the priorities and the criteria and the outcomes that want to be seen, we can turn around the NOFO and we can build a unimodule, which is our online grants application platform, to 24 to 48 hours. If we drop everything else and we focus on that, we're really fast with that. What is the delay is setting those priorities, setting that criteria. And that's where I see my office as the neutral entity to empower departments or other stakeholders, including the commission that we just discussed, But for us to be setting those priorities, I think that would be really hard for us to do. And so we can move really fast to get things launched and support applicants and all that. But I really worry about that decision-making process in terms of how do you actually design, what are the priorities actually going to be? Because I think none of us want to have happen again is another FY24 competition where it's money for anything, where we get 311 applications again, where we get 10 to 20 dollars requested for every dollar we have to give, where we're comparing sectors against other sectors. I mean, we've tried that. Targeted versus open grant programs is what I've called it. I mean, we have the stats to show how inefficient that is. And so I would really want to make sure, I think it would really depend on how quickly those decisions are made of what the priorities are going to be, what is the criteria, what is going to be those thresholds. And I also really appreciate the Commission's recommendation about having these tiers for different size organizations. Yeah. And I've said that in numerous cases. I have a whole slide on it that presented to you many times called creating lanes for different types of organizations, and also creating lanes for sectors, because certain sectors just don't do well against other sectors, mental health in particular. We have that data to show that. So I think setting those priorities, setting those things, and I think, again, that's where this other commission, I think they're struggling with, but that's something that also departments struggle with as well when they set these priorities for these kind of programs. So yeah, my team and we can move fast, but I would want to make sure it's a tight set of priorities, a tight set of criteria. We give a clear roadmap to nonprofits. They have an easy way to assess, are they eligible or not? Do they fit the priorities? Are they really equipped to apply or not? And I think that's where we see the success in the targeted grant programs, where nonprofits look at the NOFO, say, well, this isn't for me. I'm going to spend my time elsewhere. Yeah. And I don't think they object to that. I think they see it's like they actually appreciate that they have a clear sense of whether they should apply or not. And that's something that's appreciated by them. But setting those priorities, setting that criteria, making those kind of hard decisions when there's a mountain of need out there all over the place, I think that's going to be the hard part.
Okay. Ms. Howe, Ms. Jones, anything to?
Yeah, I want to support what Director Murphy said, that I think for many nonprofits, especially smaller ones where, maybe one person is wearing the hat of being the executive director and writing the grants and building relationships and providing the programming, having that specificity about what you're actually eligible for and what you're likely to, what your competition might be, makes it a lot easier to prioritize your decision making about what to apply for. As far as, and I also agree though that the priorities need to be arrived at in a transparent and accountable way. It can't just be somebody, picking up the phone and calling Director Murphy and saying, this year we're going to do this topic. I think there needs to be some, again, transparency and accountability for that. But I do hear your concerns about the timeline. And, it may be if the council, if the decision was to adopt the kind of staggered cycle recommendation, that we just kind of, deal with the status quo for this year and know that for the second year of that cycle, we have more opportunity to build that runway. But again, we don't have to solve for that today, but I do believe that it is a concern we should be thinking through.
And then I would echo everything that Bridget has shared, as well as Director Murphy. It's an incredible team that has become very nimble, and I saw the result of it yesterday myself, because I happen to have an underserved communities grant through OGM and was having difficulty with one aspect of the renewal process. And one of Director Murphy's team members literally made a video and emailed it to me and said, here's your walkthrough. So there's a lot of capacity there, but I know that it's a lot of competing and conflicting time, and it will take a lot of time to put this together. I don't know if that means, temporary bodies that can be to help them staff up as some of this is being implemented. That's all to be discussed. Even with, as Bridget has shared, the priorities, laying everything out, you then have to build the time in to meet with the community and to share all of this and to do the town hall, type events and everything, in order to make sure that we're getting it across, and to make sure people don't feel that they're being left out, that the tiered system that was described can also mean no, not this year, you don't have anything, but maybe in next year's tier, you get something. So there's a lot of different ways to move about this. And if the advisory committee is willing to stay on and do some of that heavy lifting in order to support OGM, then that's something else we can talk about. I think that there's something there, and then maybe additional few people in order to help with some of those priorities also. But it can be done. We just have to kind of figure it out.
All right. Councilmember Katz?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I too want to thank Mr. Murphy and the Office of Grants Management Office for your hard work, and the working group and the hard work of the working group for your thoughtful suggestions going forward. And Ms. Clement Johnson, we want to thank you as well for doing what you're doing. I agree, and I've said this not just for this department, but it is unfair of us, the council side, if we don't give the proper and necessary resources for somebody to do their job. We're very fast to criticize. We're not as fast to say, how are we solving this? Here's somebody that can actually help you do your work. So I agree that we have to figure out what that resource is, but we need to have that resource. And I also agree with the chair that timing could be a problem. I mean, I guess it always is. It's especially now. So, but we have to work with that. Bottom line is, for grants, for many organizations, we literally are the lifeblood of keeping our partners in business. And they are our partners. Many times the government can't do it by itself, so we turn to our partners to help, and then we don't give them enough help, and then we complain that something didn't take place, and that's not fair. I think this advisory work group has done an unbelievably good job, and I have to tell you, when I was reading through the report, and I got to the part that said, I didn't read the whole part, I just got to the part that said, terminate the legacy grants. And I thought, oh, brother, what are we thinking here? But I knew, because of the people on this working group, that you weren't going to come out with something that was going to kill any of the organizations. You were going to come out with something that's going to enhance the organizations. And I think that makes so much sense. There again, there's going to be some growing pains and some mumbling, I guess, but we have to figure out how to do what we're doing in a better way. I think the whole idea for the tiers makes sense. And that's in every way we can think about, geographically, economically, go down that list. We need to figure out, and we need to keep people in business who are larger and who are smaller. And we need to, and we need to have people who are being innovative in their thoughts. And so all of that makes sense to me. But bottom line is, it would be wonderful if we could find another Chuck Short. We will never find another Chuck Short. But if we could come up with someone half as good as Chuck Short, it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing for Montgomery County. And I'm going to end on this. You said we don't want to be duplicative, and we don't. But we need redundancy in many ways. We need to keep people in business and make certain that those who fall through the cracks don't have the cracks to fall through. So I appreciate everything you're doing. I'll turn back.
Councilmember Evans?
Sure. So I'm going to repeat my colleagues and thank you all for your hard work. I think Councilmember Stewart said it, or maybe I'm making it up, but I think it does help to know the people that are doing this work. Ms. Howe, I know you from MCCPTA, the nonprofit world, as well as Ms. Jones. So thank you for putting yourselves forward. I think we were just talking in a previous session about our volunteers that step forward, and that what we can do is rely on your commitment and work ethic to help us get this work done. And so I do believe that the work that you put forward will allow us to look at our nonprofit organizations as partners more so than applicants. So I appreciated that. I like the tier approach as well. And many of the things that you all raised were questions that I had. Director Albanos, you were just in the previous work session, and it's staggering to know that one person is over 588 grants. So my question was going to be, even though it's kind of getting deep, is with this expansion, which sounds great, do we have the infrastructure to do this work? I don't know. This is what I think that timing is never going to be right. But I do think it's important. Ms. Jones, you mentioned the outreach. People need to know what's coming ahead so that they're not caught off guard, and that some of the organizations maybe that we're not tapping into are made aware, and they can trust and know that this process is going to be efficient and effective in order for them to participate. I think about you mentioned like small nonprofits. I think about equity, and not everybody has the ability to do great grant writing, and so do they have good work that could impact the county in the way that we need, even though they might not be as effective in grant writing? So that support that we would offer to different organizations would be very helpful. So I hope that it's not a lot to ask the advisory board to continue if you all are able to do that. I think I would like to see that happen so that as we roll this out, that people are able to understand, particularly if the legacy grants could possibly be terminated, that people understand what that looks like. And then we get a better feel for the residents who have benefited from this regular funding, how that could impact them. So I just think it's important to bring the community along, to have conversations, to get that feedback so that as changes are made, that people are aware. And when I think about the budget, this is going to be my first budget, that we don't have the ability to give everybody the funding, but it's important that there's not, I don't want to say favoritism, but there is the ability for us to put measurements in place where we look at impact, that we're able to measure that, to be able to see the effectiveness and efficiency of the organizations that do get funding on a regular basis, and to revisit that. So this is not us taking a vote, this is a discussion, but I think it's really important that we have this talk. So that's what I just wanted to share.
Councilmember,
Yeah, Ms. Jones.
thank you for that. And as a taxpayer, I don't want everybody to get a grant either. So I play a different role as an executive director and as a taxpayer in the county. But I appreciate the interest and the zeal for creating this strategy and trying to get it going as soon as possible, because that's what it's going to take. You talked about hoping. Hope is not a good management tool, but strategy is. And if we can stick with this and make this available and make sure that the organizations that might be underserved understand the process better, maybe they understand even their other opportunities better. That's often the case, and I think we've both seen this where organizations think, oh, I just go to my local government and don't realize that there are many other pillars to generating revenue within your nonprofit organization, and they often are taken advantage of, and that becomes part of a lot of the work that we've collectively done over the years. Over my 140 years as a capacity builder, I've seen it over and over. I think I've seen everything, but appreciate the interest in keeping the team together. I wasn't sure, Chair Stewart, when I was asked to join this, I wasn't sure why. When I thought, oh, you've got all the brains in the room, you don't need me. So it was a great learning experience to also listen to other thoughts, and thank you to everybody who served on this. And it was a pleasure to be able to do this.
Director Murphy, do you?
Just one thing to add again about the context of kind of the grant sphere, and this
Yeah.
isn't talking about the nonprofit funding sphere. In FY26, we're projecting we're going to have roughly 20 different grants competitions that we've done, and these don't include community grants or the legacy renewals. So the richness of opportunities for nonprofits to apply and get county money, mostly from, and these are mostly from departments. So it's roughly around, we expect to give out $61 million as grants through competitions this year. Community grants NDAs, 13 million roughly. So just ballpark math, the vast majority of nonprofit funding opportunities as grants are coming from department-based budgets, and that's going to increase. We're already talking with more departments or more divisions within existing departments about using a grants tool or grant competition as a different way and more appropriate way to get out funds. So I think that's one thing is where, and Ron Halber made this comment, I think, in the first session of we can't look at the community grants in a vacuum. And that was kind of the scope of the working group, but that was something he raised early on. But where you do see these tremendous number of other grants opportunities that didn't exist before OGM did being out there, you see a lot of nonprofits going after and winning these other opportunities. Our most successful organization, FY25, was Vietnamese American Services. I believe they won every single thing that they applied for, including federal grants that we sub-granted out. So I think that's one thing to look at is what is the totality of the grants and the funding opportunities available, and are there going to be other opportunities? What I hear back from nonprofits on there is say, okay, yeah, we see all these, the 20 plus grants opportunities OGM did this year, but none of them apply to us. We work on X sector, and none of them focus on that. And I think that is where I think the commission did see where the community grants kind of fill that hole of what are the things that are not being covered by other efforts. So, but yeah, there is a rich environment for grants opportunities in county government. We're increasing that day by day. That's, I think, where my staff is most successful. And I think, as some of you have seen our newsletter, we publish at least like 20 to 30, sometimes 40 external opportunities within each newsletter. It's usually 3/4 of it is just, here's a list of foundations or other funders and things they're putting out, because we want nonprofits to see that there are other opportunities out there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Murphy. I think that I really appreciate what you just said, because I think that is so important of taking, as Ms. Howe and Ms. Jones said, like figuring out how we do this priority setting and how and like the timing of it, because reminding ourselves that the community grants are a small part of this bigger picture, and that when Councilmember Navarro like thought about what this was, it was really the idea of having the community grants to go to organizations that are not getting other grants, that were either just starting out or were the smaller ones or doing things innovative that didn't fit into a natural category and meet requirements and things. So I think it's remembering what is the role of the community grants, and then within that, how do we create the priorities and the criteria so that our Office of Grants Management can put out NOFOs that our nonprofits understand, and that the reviewers can then compare apples to apples. I feel like that's where we are. And how do we get from here to point B by September is the question I'm kind of grappling with. Director Albanos, do you have the answer?
Not exactly, but so by virtue of having been around as long as I have, I've been involved in two processes that you just described. One was during the recession when the county government contracted and had to reduce so much of its budget all at the same time. And so emergency work groups were established to better align our efforts and address the needs of the public and establish the plan like you just described, Chair Stewart. And the second time was during COVID, when we did align our efforts and basically created a triage situation in which we were addressing the most pressing needs and then working backwards from there. I'll just make two quick observations that I think present a unique opportunity this year. And the timing is challenging, to say the least, but it's also an opportunity because the next executive will develop a transition team, and the next executive will develop a transition plan. And that transition team will make recommendations to the next executive about what the makeup of their cabinet should look like. And I think this is the perfect timing and launchpad. And I'm hoping that one or more of the members of this work group serve on that transition team so that they can speak in the first person about the recommendations that have been made by the work group that would then have a chance of being implemented actually more quickly as a new administration is being established. So I think that will be helpful. The second thing is, once we do the alignment, once we've established those priorities, the philanthropic community is waiting and willing to be a strong partner so that we can leverage the county resources even further than what is being invested now. They just want that direction from us. And in terms of what this will look like between now and September, I don't have a perfect answer. I've been back for 3 months, but I've been incredibly impressed with Director Murphy and the work that he's done to get us to this point. And I know the pain points that he has gone through. He is a very creative government community leader. And I look forward to working with him and the other members of the executive branch who are more directly involved in this work and see if we might be able to come back to you with some thoughts on what might work in partnership with the council. And then I'll also note one last thing for now is it is so serendipitous for me to have Ms. Clemens Johnson lead this effort because as lead for HHS, along with 2 of her colleagues, she has a very unique perspective and perch on these issues as well. And so I think we need to better align the work, frankly, of the council and the executive branch and include our colleagues in the Office of Legislative Oversight as well, who I think can help collectively come up with some pretty concrete recommendations on those priorities. Because last year's budget was the canary in the coal mine. This year, you all, I am not envious of the challenges you all will have to undertake over the next several weeks. And that's just a precursor to the next 2 fiscal years' budgets, which are going to be very challenging. So it is important for us to strategize and align our work more effectively.
I just wanted to add 2 suggestions or elements to the conversation. One being just to underscore the importance of outreach that we, I think, have all mentioned. I wanted to just share that Nonprofit Montgomery, we have invited, actually, we're going to get the gang together, hopefully, and do kind of an Ask Me Anything for Nonprofit Montgomery members about what did the working group suggest and why. So we want to be transparent about that process. So we're trying to figure out a date for that, but we wanted to get through the formal presentation. Second, there is some work that we're doing currently with Nonprofit Montgomery and a number of partners that are convening organizations in the county. We've come together multiple times to connect over possible future opportunities for working together, shared measurement, creating, again, looking at potentially identifying some community-wide priorities from the perspective of convening organizations. And by those, I mean organizations like McHale, Primary Care Coalition, Children's Opportunity Alliance, the Food Council, organizations that maybe serve a subsector and bring people together. And so I think that potentially part of this transitioning process and identifying priorities process could loop in some existing infrastructure that Nonprofit Montgomery already has. We're doing some of this work in partnership, potentially in the future with Primary Care Coalition. So we could potentially leverage some of that, those existing connections and meetings to help be a springboard, at least, for the prioritization process.
Great. That sounds awesome. Well, how about for next steps, as Director Albanaz, I think, volunteered himself, which we very much appreciate, and that the executive branch, as well as our council staff here, sort of think through what may be good next steps, and in partnership with the council, and then as well, we can work with Ms. Clemens Johnson and review the resolution that started this work group and see, working with all of you and Ms. Howe, as you just mentioned, is if there is an extension we can suggest to our colleagues to continue some of this work and maybe loop in some of the work that individuals on the working group are doing in other capacities. And so I think with those 2 things, we can continue. I think having forward momentum and motion is important here. And making sure, and Ms. Howe, I very much appreciate you do the Ask Me Anything, because I do think making sure our nonprofit partners understand what we're doing and communicating with them is so important, and then hearing back from them. So hope we would get an invite to that so we can be flies on the wall and listen to people's reactions. I think that would be very helpful for us. So anything else?
Good.
No? Oh, Ms. Cummins-Johnson, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as a matter of procedure, so the next time that we will be discussing the grants is at the FY27 budget recommendations. So namely, when it comes to the community grants, NDA, and a lot of the recommendations that we're talking about up here, the decision in front of the committee and the council would mostly be about the legacy grants for FY27. The rest of the NDA is funding the third year of the community grants and then the other smaller grants that we have within the NDA. So, like I said, as a matter of procedure for next steps in terms of if the legacy grants are discontinued and if there's gonna be a big pot of community grant funding, we'll just need to figure out what that looks like because we aren't making decisions on the FY28 budget.
Right.
So I think any recommendation from a community board or grant would be helpful in informing that process. And for the council and whomever is the executive in thinking about the timing, because if we're talking about the NOFO going out November, December, that's right around the transition time of when the new executive would come on board. So he may come through and have a total different approach to that. Because I will say for the committee, I don't think of course, you all haven't taken the position to define what the priorities are. You just fund the money. So it would have to be some careful conversation or some clear conversation about if we do take the recommendations or if the executive or council, what procedurally needs to happen with that. So I just did want to kind of put that.
I appreciate that, Ms. Clemens-Johnson, and I not to put my colleagues on the spot because we're not taking any votes today. This is a discussion, but I think, as I said, I appreciate all these recommendations and agree with them, and are concerned about the timeline. So just to put it out there, ending the community grants, legacy grants, if we were to say that now, I think that's way too premature to say that now, and that the county executive did put in for another year. I have complained vociferously from my perch here about how we've been handling the legacy grants, but I don't want any more confusion on people's parts. So I think from my perspective, until we actually figure out what we're doing, we need to stay the course on the legacy grants, because those groups have been through the ringer, quite frankly, with the lack of decision-making and information that has been provided over the last few years, and the extension of each time they got extensions and other things. So I'm not personally of the mind to make a decision and then have to give another extension. And so, since I don't want to get the cart before the horse, because we haven't talked about that in the budget, which I appreciate, what the county executive does have is for one more year of the legacy grants. And my inclination is, given all what we need to work out here and move forward, is likely when we take that up, that would be continued as we're doing all these other things, because I think it's there are a lot of moving pieces here, and as we're dealing with the overall budget, I'm not sure everything's going to neatly fall into place to be able to make some of these decisions. Is that?
Yeah, I agree with you.
You good? Okay. Does that help?
Yes. I just wanted to make that clear. And then at that time, I can also make sure that we are discussing the AWG resolution, and I can put forth what the options are for the council to consider.
Great. That'd be awesome. Terrific. Well, thank you all. And Ms. Jones, I am very glad that you accepted the invitation to be on this. And Director Murphy, sorry, did you want to say something? My apologies.
Just a note on the timeline. I think while October, December has been put out there, if we did have a tight NOFO, tight set of criteria, clear priorities and all that, we can and have done grants competitions in as little as 2 months.
Yep.
From NOFO launch to all the awards being out the door and signed. So, but it really depends on application volume, and it really depends on the clarity of that. It depends on having a good set of reviewers ready to go. Now we usually train the reviewers while for these department targeted grant programs while the application is still open.
Yeah.
So that the second that they hit, within 24 to 48 hours, they're in the reviewer's queue and they can go through them. So it is feasible, but if we get those 311 applications again, if we don't have a set of reviewers done, and I think, again, OEMHS is a great example of a department handling a huge grant program that went through it in really remarkable efficiency. So I think there are successes to be had, but it really starts with a clear set of priorities, clear set of criteria. So we could, and we are launching, we still have FY26 grant programs we haven't launched yet, but we expect to have those fully done by the end of FY26. So we could have a different timeline. It's possible, but it really all depends on what the criteria is.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. And I think our goal is to set you up for success so that when we know we're going out there for the community grants the next time, we all feel really confident that the program is set up for a win for our county government, for our nonprofits, and for our residents. And I think that is really the goal here. So great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right. That was our only item. We are adjourned.